generation do you think is more likely to give up personal information about themselves without even thinking about it?
Definitely ours.
Is that a problem?
Absolutely.
How do we combat that then?
Don't use Google.
Well, I do
I like
suppose we can all
Thomas.
become Amish.
Well,
We can
can
just go back to churning butter and
Can you elaborate on privacy laws and our rights to privacy and how that works with the Constitution so that we can be like best prepared to protect ourselves when we're, because it's unavoidable in our culture to interact with social media almost,
Unless you're
Right.
unless you're Amish.
So there's, the issue mainly with the law is that it's not up to date enough to deal with what we're currently dealing with. The Stored Communications Act, which handles, like if an internet service provider similar to Time Warner, Verizon, AT&T, their servers have record pretty much of all of the internet traffic that goes across their ISP. So what the Stored Communications Act says is that when presented with a warrant, and it lays out the different amounts of information that are required to be given by a subpoena, a court order, or a search warrant, which is exactly where Facebook got this idea of what they're going to give for what type of government order. It doesn't provide any type of provision saying that the company can't give your information without the warrant. It's saying what the company has to give when presented with the warrant. And this act was passed in 1986. So if you think about what was going on in 1986, these people could have had no concept of how much data private corporations would own in 2019. So
Are you saying it should be revised then?
I think it needs a major revision, or maybe just scrap it and come back with a new act, because the whole point here is they based the 1986 Stored Communications Act off of the Fourth Amendment, which says the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, and so on. The issue here is where it says houses, papers, and effects. These people had no idea what we would be dealing with. These people had some idea, but still almost no idea what 2019 would be dealing with. So what the courts have been forced to do is to figure out where Facebook servers, whether Facebook servers are a house, a paper, or an effect. And that's a very difficult legal road to navigate. So I think the federal government, or at least state governments, need to codify exactly what protections a private citizen has with their data.
And I think one contributing factor to the comparative sort of antiquation of laws as it relates to technology is both that the legal process takes quite a long time to get anything done, and because the people that tend to have the most expertise in the areas tend to be the ones that are working for the companies, because they can offer much higher salaries and much better benefits packages than any state, local, or federal government can hope to. And so there's a great disparity in terms of expertise and technical understanding. I mean, one situation that underlined this was the congressional hearings with Mark Zuckerberg that happened a little while ago, which quite publicly showed the lack of understanding of many of the people that sit on these committees that deal with issues of science and technology when it comes, or their lack of understanding when it comes to areas of, online privacy and just basic functions of the internet.
No,
I was just
please,
going to say,
please.
how long has the government been surveilling its citizens?
I mean, in some form or another, that we've had surveillance pretty much as long as we've had federal law enforcement, or any sort of law enforcement.
And why do you think, or when maybe, I'll say when, did this become, you mentioned Snowden, but when do you think this became such a hot topic and more people became aware? What maybe prompted that?
People didn't really become aware until the series of leaks came out of the NSA about what they've been surveilling and the metadata collection But the federal government has slowly ramped up data collection and means of obtaining data from corporations since the early 90s. FBI formed their DNA database in 1990. We have no clue how long the NSA, CIA have been monitoring communications because, like I said, we didn't acknowledge the NSA existed until a few years ago. So,
Well, and I think the big thing that has caused public outcry in terms of especially NSA surveillance is that their policy, broadly speaking, is to collect everything and then discard all the things that do not fit within their authorized parameters, whereas traditionally it would be that you are only gathering what you're authorized to collect. And so that's kind of the, I would say, thing that separates that's the reason why the Snowden revelations were revelations and not just another thing that the government does.
Do you find, like, for example, like the use of FISA, do you think, you mentioned the technology earlier and some of the laws in place, but do you find, like, say, for example, the FISA courts, that they're more up to date with the technology?
the issue with the FISA courts is, once again, they have no oversight that is really, that would be able to uncover the level of corruption that would be possible. Not saying that it's happening, but that could be possible with a secret court. But in the end, about 99% of warrant applications sent into the FISA court saying we want to surveil someone are approved.
Mm-hmm.
So the government's reason for this is saying that we are really careful about even sending in an application. So we have to have really high standards to even apply for one of these warrants. That's why 99% are approved. I find that hard to believe.
You think it's more just a rubber stamp?
I think sometimes it can be.
Now, one other note that I would provide is that the FISA court process is a bit different from a standard court process in that there's a great deal of revision of the application that goes on throughout the proceeding. And according to FISC, so these are their own numbers, but 24.4% of the applications are revised in some sort of substantive way, so not including things like changes to grammar or if somebody forgot a semicolon somewhere. But so 24.4% of them are altered in some way before they're approved. And again, the government would argue that the reason that rate of approval is so high, up near 99%, as Nathan said, is because they take it so seriously, and because any FISC or FISA application that goes to FISC has to be approved by both the Director of National Intelligence and the Attorney General or their designee.
So, Nathan, you made an interesting statement that there wasn't a lot of abuse of that program, but I seem to think that the word FISA has been in the news a lot recently because of some perceived abuses of that
Right.
policy, especially as it relates to national politics. Talk to me a little bit about what's going on, what the accusations are, what the, I guess, I don't know if investigation is the right word, but what the uncovering of information.
Well, the allegation, of course, is that the FISA court completely just botched a warrant approval and approved something that should never have been approved to surveil the Trump campaign and associates. The problem with the FISA court, all of those documents look like this when I look at them. So there's no way of knowing outside of maybe even a private congressional hearing, but that information probably wouldn't even be released then, what actually happened.
So the FISA court's a rogue agency, unchecked, unfettered.
It's, once again, could be.
Or is it okay for the evidence to be used as alleged to be paid for by a political party that provided evidence to submit to the FISA court? Do you believe that that's, it's alleged,
Right.
but would you, in your opinion?
Right. In my opinion, evidence is evidence. So if the evidence was, my bigger concern is whether the evidence is factual or not. I think that's the point of the FISA court. So if my political opponent dug up dirt on me that was accurate, factually correct, and gave it to the FBI. I don't know that there's a legal issue with that. I don't like it. I don't think we should have political campaigns submitting information to secret courts with secret judges.
But Nathan, it's not what happened in the allegations here. The allegations are that that federal agency was being used to gain that information, not I have information, I'm going to share it with the government. I'm going to use the government to get information.
Oh, so I think one thing that needs to be separated out is that Nathan was talking, I believe, about the alleged use
I thought-
of the Steele dossier in the
In the FISA
application
warrant.
for the FISA warrant,
Gotcha.
not about what was done with the information gained through the FISA warrant. So, which is what you're getting into.
Which is what I'm getting.
And my question was exactly,
So how does our president feel about all of this? He's got a lot of opinions.
He's not a big fan.
Man.
are you a fan?
No, I'm not a fan. I don't like. So you go back 10 years ago, there would have been people in Congress like Rand Paul lighting their hair on fire about every single time a FISA warrant was approved, every single time we raised the deficit, things like that. For some reason, people have forgotten about this issue. Like, it gets brought up on the news sometimes, people scream about the FISA court, but more generally, no one gets into a deeper discussion about where all this data is coming from. Like, where is the FISA court getting the data from? Why are they able to tap these people's computers? Why are they able to get all their internet traffic? Well, it's because Google has all the information. So, I think that's the bigger issue that everyone is just brushing over.
So do you think, because I asked this question the other day, and I wasn't, because you didn't mention, but you all seem very familiar with FISA, the Patriot Act. So you mentioned 10 years ago, Rand Paul's hair would have been on fire. What about a few days ago, where Congress voted to take the steps to do an official vote on the continuing resolution to fund government, but they added the Patriot Act as part, which is not, as part of a funding resolution for government. What's your opinion on how that was handled versus maybe 10 years ago?
I don't believe there should ever be a reason for things like that to happen. If we're going to renew the Patriot Act, if we're going to renew funding for certain parts of the Patriot Act, it needs to be its own resolution. It's similar to how we tacked, now I'm not calling out the policy position, but Kentucky tacked pension reform onto a sewer bill. I don't like that. I don't think that's operating in transparency. I think that's trying to shove things through without anyone noticing. Similarly, quite a few years back, Kentucky tacked legalizing abortion through midwives onto a, goodness, I don't even remember what it was. I think it was a tax bill. So things like that, again, contribute to this whole issue of a lack of transparency.
I mean, regardless of anyone's perspective on this issue, I hope that we could all agree that we need to have a serious substantive debate about what exactly the government and corporations are doing with private information, and what we even consider private information to be anymore. And whether that venue should be the House of Representatives or the Senate or, a non-governmental forum, I think it's a conversation that needs to happen. And do things like tacking the Patriot Act reauthorization onto a continuing resolution don't really further that. Because whatever it is, we need to figure it out and have a clearly expressed rationale for why it's happening.
But didn't you just contradict yourself? Because earlier you said that in those conversations, and Mark Zuckerberg being in front of Congress kind of was your point, and then he actually wore a tie, which stunned me. But you said that all the cards are on the other side of the table, right? Corporations have all the knowledge, have all of the brain trust, have all of the information, have all of the knowledge. The government, at least politicians in this case, don't usually. So who is qualified to sit across the table and establish that if all of the cards are on the other side?
I'm saying that I think we need to have the conversation, not necessarily that we can have the conversation.
Why should we have the conversation if we can't have the conversation?
Like, I think it is a thing that we need to improve as a country.
Right.
I don't know if we're capable of it.
So why are we even talking about it?
Because government's the only entity, and I hate saying this, the only entity that can put a check on the corporations. The only one that has a potential to do so.
But doesn't it have a stake in the game? Like, it gets benefit from this, right?
Not these politicians.
Okay.
Because once again, you take people like Rand Paul, and you just say government surveillance, and his blood pressure increases significantly. It's those kind of people who would put a check on corporations, who would approve things like consumer data protection. And that's, in my opinion, the only way in which this whole slippery slope dystopian future process could be stopped.
So I was gonna ask you, Apple, Google, who are they accountable to as far as this information goes? Are they accountable to
No.
the government, or who, are they accountable to
I
anyone?
mean, the government could pass stronger regulations on the ways that they handle private data, although that would almost certainly cause us to be engulfed in a massive legal battle, because ultimately the way that, less Apple, but especially Google and Facebook and other social media companies get their money, because they give you their service for free, is by taking that information and using it to sell advertising to third parties. And so if they don't have access to that information, like, they're not a charitable organization, and so they wouldn't be able to function. I say less Apple because they get a great amount of revenue from hardware sales, which is why if you've seen a lot of their recent ads, they do push that they are a more private platform than, say, Android with Google, because Google is heavily reliant on that advertising for revenue, which is dependent on your personal data. So if you want to live in a world where your personal data is not exploited in the way that it is, then that's a world where you need to be willing to pay for a subscription for any online service you want to use. Because they still need money to be able to operate. So if you're not going to pay by, in effect, selling them your data in exchange for a service and sort of bartering in that way, then you're going to have to pay in a more immediate and literal way.
I know you guys, I know at least a few of you are involved politically. Are you surprised at what data, say when you're out working for a candidate, what data you have available to you on people you contact, say whether you're out knocking on doors or working an event, when somebody you interact with that you know, or does it ever surprise you how much data that a political party would have on that person because they bought the information?
It's pretty shocking, because when I'm going door to door, it pulls up the voter profile, name, address, known names, party registration, prior addresses, prior residency. It's
How many
so
times they
much
voted?
data. How many times they voted, when they voted, what year they started voting, have they switched their party registration, and what year did that happen? I mean, it's all there for me to look at, and I know there's so much more data that I don't see that they have.
And well, one thing that does, or one thing I would say that illustrates this problem nicely, or this area of discussion as far as political data goes nicely, is that I was researching a political data company called i360 a little while ago, and they go fully into the weeds in terms of, say, they buy data from corporations like, and I don't know if they use this corporation specifically, but I'll just use it as an example. With Kroger, with your Kroger Plus card, the reason that Kroger's willing to give you a discount if you have that little piece of plastic and scan it every time that you shop is that way they know it's the same person coming back every week and buying these products. And so then they know, ooh, look, they started buying baby formula, so if we give them a coupon for diapers in a few months, or even right now, they may more willing to buy that, and then they can also turn around and sell that data to, say, a political data company that would be able to use that to know, oh, okay, this person has this profile of purchases, and so they're more likely to be concerned about, say, the environment, because they shop for eco-friendly products. And so we should market to them in this way, rather than in this other way that we market to someone who's more concerned with hunting.
So we're talking about big corporations and their tendencies to use or not use data. I'd be curious to know, that would seem like an example of somebody who's doing something well, maybe, or at least doing something in a more business economical way. Talk to me a little bit about Apple in particular. We'll talk about them.